I cannot imagine living this life without the hope of eternity, without the hope of seeing my mother again one day, without the hope of being with her in eternity with Jesus Christ one day. I can't imagine that. And so to me, having chosen to choose hope over fear, over resentment, over anger, my life is so much better today because I can thank God in every circumstance.
Rebekah Welch lost her mother with no warning. She was a true matriarch and deeply loved by many, with a full and vibrant life still ahead of her. Today, Rebekah talks about the choice of perspective and God's presence in the midst of pain. Welcome to A Stronger Faith, a podcast that gives you a front row seat as everyday people share the experiences that changed their faith in hopes that they'll also change yours. I'm your host, Stacy McCants, and we pray that God uses this conversation to move you toward Him, especially if you have questions around God's presence in pain. Meet Rebekah Welch. So, Rebekah Welch, you reached out not long ago, and I'm so glad you're here. And we've talked about this a few times and from different angles, and every time we begin to talk about it, I'm like, okay, we can't talk about this anymore because we're going to talk about everything, and we want to save that for when we are actually on the podcast. And now we're here, so thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I guess you came up not long ago and approached and said, you know, as time goes on, I feel like I am more aware of the presence of God in a really tough situation with each day. And I feel like it's important that I share that. And after listening to it, you're exactly right. And really what it is you lost your mom, 2017. So it's been 4 years, right around 4 years. And that's not a lot of time, but it's a little bit of time. And it's given you a chance to get some, I don't know if perspective is right, but it's given you a chance to see things with some time, with some space from it, and maybe even recognize some things that were going on then that were God moving in your life, and not just moving in your life, but I think you feel like protecting you and maybe carrying you through what was a pretty tough time. From what I gather, you and your mom were pretty close. Tell me about your relationship with her.
Yeah, so there was 4 kids in my family, so I'm the second of 4. So her relationship with all of us was very different. We all adored her. She was a force. She was beautiful. She was smart. She was elegant. She wrote notes and cards for every single holiday, event, all of it. And so she was part of that generation that did that. So I still have some of her words to me that just mean so much. She shared her wisdom with me through some of those notes that I've been able to locate over the years as I've needed her. I think I just looked to her as, especially in raising children, as someone that I respected because of the hard work that she put into raising her children, the wisdom she imparted onto us. And I didn't always necessarily agree with everything that she said or did, but do we always agree with our parents?
No, I don't think so.
So, but I think that in the end, her legacy would be, I guess, the things that she taught her kids that we're able to impart in our children. And I think the greatest gift that she and my father both gave us was the gift of Jesus. So for that, I'm eternally grateful, because not everybody's parents does that for them. Not everybody's parents gives them that gift.
So what was childhood like then? I mean, it sounds like it was pretty good.
Chaotic.
Yeah, well, I mean, how many kids were there?
4.
4? Yeah.
Chaotic.
I have 3, and it's total chaos. Like we just added a dog.
Yeah.
So.
And we haven't done that yet. We also have 3 children, but we have not added the dog yet because of the level of chaos.
But yeah, your childhood, 4 kids, and
4 kids.
But it sounds like it was pretty good.
It was good. My dad was military, and so he was gone at times in my childhood. He wasn't military full time until 9/11. My parents did divorce when I was around 15 or 16. And so that was a hard time in our lives. But I'm able now to look back at that and see the good that came from that also because of the people that both of my parents wound up marrying and what they've both meant to our lives, my life and my children's lives and my brother's and my sister's life. So, but yes, I would say childhood was good. We grew up Jackson, Mississippi, and went to a great school there, went to a great church there. My parents always had us at church, which is another commitment. And
so they were both people of faith.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I was looking through some things last night, and my parents, when they lived in California, it was following their marriage, they went to Charles Swindoll's church.
Oh, yeah.
And they had a good relationship with Dr. Swindoll. And so a lot of the teachings I think that my mother and my father instilled in us came from him. And I found a few letters last night in which my parents were talking about trying to determine if they were going to be moving back to California. This was after, I think, the war. My father was in Vietnam after all of that. And when they came home, they were trying to determine if they were going back to California. And Dr. Swindoll wrote to them and talked about he was helping them discern God's will for their lives. So I think that even way back then in the very beginning of their marriage, they were always working towards finding what God's will for their life was going to be. And so to have that example in our lives, to see my parents live that kind of life, especially early on in their marriage, it's a great example for all of us. Were there mistakes? I mean, obviously, yes. But in the end, I think that the things that both of my parents taught us, and my stepfather and my stepmother, the things that they've taught us, I think that God worked good in our lives, even from something like a divorce. So, but yeah, I mean, growing up as a child, having the opportunity to attend a good school, have parents who cared and loved us. It was chaos for sure in my home, but another thing I'm so thankful for is my siblings, because I think besides the gift of Jesus, another thing that they gave us was each other. And I think that having my siblings during the last 4 years has made all of the difference for me. I can't imagine going through it alone, having to go through it alone. So I'm very thankful that my parents gave us each other.
Yeah, where were you in the lineup of 4?
The second of 4, so I am a middle child.
A middle child / leader, huh?
Yes.
Somewhere in there.
I'm probably the one that would do anything for any of them, and they knew it. So maybe a doormat at times when we were kids. But
servant, we call them, right?
Yeah. I remember wanting a baby sister so bad and praying over that. I remember praying with my parents, with my mother, over having a baby sister, because I was one of 3 and 2 were boys. And my mom told me years later, after they had my sister, she said, "We did not find out what we were having when we were having your sister, because I couldn't look at you and tell you we were having a boy, because I knew how disappointed you would be." And I can very vividly remember when my dad called from the hospital. I remember picking up the phone and him telling me that I had a baby sister. And I remember throwing that phone down and saying, God answers prayers. So I can remember when I was 5 years old, or not quite 5 years old, having that memory of God answering prayers. So I think that this is just God answering your prayers. God being a part of your life has been a part of my life my entire life.
Yeah. So. And your mom, critical in laying that foundation. And
very much so.
So you close during those years?
The early years?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Teenage years?
A girl with her mother.
Teenage girl, yeah.
So there were definitely ups and downs, but there was never one time she didn't come through for me. And I recognized that. She wanted us to be mature and grow and learn and be independent. And so even when I was in college, she would let me do things on my own. She'd let me handle things on my own. But if I ever needed her, she was there. And there were a couple of situations in college. I started having seizures when I was a freshman in college, and it stemmed from a car accident. I had a pretty serious car accident when I was a senior in high school. And so she, from afar, helped me figure out what I was going to do, doctors and all of that. And then she was here when I suffered a seizure in my apartment with a couple of my roommates. She came immediately, and she took me home we were living in Atlanta at that time. She took me home to Atlanta and took me to Emory. And we figured out what was going on. She helped me work through all of that. As a result, school suffered because of that situation.
Yeah.
And I remember calling her one day and saying, Mom, I just need you to come help because I need to figure these courses out. I need to figure out how to get to the dean of the college because I need to withdraw. I just didn't know where to go, what to do. She said, I'm there, on my car, on the way. And she was. So very dependable. In my later years, she adored my children. My children, just adored her. She kept an apartment where we live because she lived in Houston, Texas, which was a good distance from where we live. And so she would come and stay for weeks at a time and help whenever we needed her. So dependable, reliable, strong. She was all those things. Brilliant, very smart. So there's way more than just the spiritual and the support and all of those things that a mother should be instilling in her children. There's way more than that.
Yeah.
I remember as a child, she would tell me, I'm not your friend right now, but if I do my job right, then one day we will be friends. And we were.
That's great parenting there. I know a
Yes.
lot of people that try to be friends of their young children.
It's not our job.
You can't do that.
And it's not our job. So I need to parent you so that you can grow into a responsible person who can be a productive member of society. And that is my job right now, is to raise you in God's word. It's to give you the tools that you need to be a healthy adult who can function. And I have to make the right decisions for my kids. And but I think my mother instilled that in me for sure, because I remember her telling me that, and she told me that all the time. And so, I always appreciate that piece of wisdom for sure.
What's your best memory of her?
Gosh, there's so many.
It's a hard question. I get that.
Okay. So this was in college, and it was the day I graduated with my undergraduate degree. And it took me 5 years to graduate with my undergraduate degree. And it was because I had gone through that time period where I suffered from seizures, and I'm very well controlled on my medication. There's no lingering effects from it. Certainly I have to monitor it, but back then I was navigating all of that. And when you're 20, 21 years old and you're having to deal with something like that, it's difficult. So school kind of slowed down for me. But there was never a doubt that I was going to graduate from college. I mean, it was going to happen. And so, but I remember on my graduation day, my mother being so excited. And I remember looking at her and saying, Mama, everybody graduates from college. Like, this is no big deal. And I mean, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that this is great. This is a fun day, but I was always going to do this. And she said, no, ma'am, not everyone graduates from college. Only 30% of this country holds a bachelor's degree. And this was back, in 2003, 2004. So I know that the numbers are different today, but at that point, when she said that to me, and then she said, and even fewer than that will hold a master's degree, because I was already talking about going on and getting my master's. And so when she said that, it gave me a new perspective on my education. It gave me this perspective of gratitude and thankfulness. And that was the point where I began to really appreciate my education and to really love the fact that I was educated in this way and that I had the ability to do that, because I know not everybody does. And I remember her, I just remember that. It just stands out to me. So when I tell people, falling into a career in higher education, when I credit something or somebody with that, it's always going to be my mother, because she helped me to love my education and to love the fact that I was able to be educated. So that's a very fond memory of my mother.
It sounds like she taught you a lot. And, even in that moment, it seems like that's kind of a mother's wisdom sort of created a little bit of a paradigm shift for you in what you had done. Certainly there's proud moms. I got a very proud mom too. But it sounds like when she spoke about things like that, your ears perked up, and she had that kind of impact on you.
She did.
For sure.
Yeah. Another time I remember, and this was when we found out we were having our third child very unexpectedly. And I called her, and it was very early on. We just found out it probably a week or two before. And I never want anybody to think that I'm upset over having a baby. It's not that, but my second child was 6 months old. And so it was a very much I was fearful, I guess, because I have a baby. I'm about to have another one, and how am I going to do this? And
that's not. You typically like a little more space there.
Space.
I don't know that most moms eventually forget about the pain of childbirth, but it's not that quick typically. It's like, I need a little more space than that.
No. And I, having been through that with children 15 months apart, I don't know why anybody would willingly have their children that close. But I mean, certainly things are better today than they were back then, but it was a little hairy. But when I called my mother to tell her, she just kept saying, oh, Rebekah, oh my goodness, just because I was so upset over it. Okay, so we hang up the phone, and 5 minutes later, she called me back and she said, honey, I just have to apologize to you because you just caught me so off guard. And if you knew my mother, she was never caught off guard. And so I definitely caught her off guard that day. She said, I just have to tell you I'm sorry. And I want to tell you that this baby is a blessing, and this is a gift from God. And we are going to be fine, and you are going to be fine, and I'm going to be there to help you, and I'm going to be there to be with you. It's just not the way that it worked out, obviously, but to have her call back and just be this, after she'd had a moment of just feeling like I was feeling, for her to call back and say, okay, we've got this, and just kind of a take charge way. I hung up the phone thinking, she's right. We're going to be okay. And obviously we are okay. So just having a mom that was able to step back from a situation and give you some perspective on it, that was meaningful as well, for sure.
Yeah. So what took her?
Yeah. So she had AFib, and which, AFib, you don't want to have it. A lot of people have AFib. A lot of people live with it. There are treatments. There are things that are just routine that the doctors do. And one of them is a blood thinner, and that's to prevent a stroke. And so they put you on a blood thinner in order to keep your heart from shooting blood clots off to your brain. And so she was on a blood thinner. And but sometimes blood thinners can cause, or this particular one, there was a possibility that it could cause spontaneous bleeding. And I can't say that's what happened. I'm not a medical professional, but I do know that we were at one of the best hospitals in Houston and in the world, one of the top neurological hospitals, and they couldn't figure out what happened. They knew that it was a spontaneous bleed because it resolved itself. They couldn't even find where the bleed started. It was a spontaneous bleed, but the thing is, because she was on that blood thinner, she bled and she bled and she bled. And this particular blood thinner didn't have an antidote. Some of them have antidotes that they can give you a shot of vitamin K or something like that and reverse the effects. This particular blood thinner was a newer blood thinner, and it did not have an antidote. But it came with some positives too, which is the reason she chose this particular one. Instead of having to go and have your blood tested constantly, this one, you didn't have to do that. So it gave you a better quality of life, I suppose, in that area. And she also trusted her doctors, and she believed them and what they were saying. And I'm not saying what they were saying was wrong, because she was certainly a very, very rare case, probably one of the most extreme cases, unfortunately. So she called my stepfather. She was actually packing to come to visit us the next day. And I had not seen her since Christmas. And this was in April. It was April 18th that it occurred. And she was packing, and she started to get a headache. And so she called my stepfather, and he worked for NASA, and asked him if he would come home. And so he got in the car, and he got to her within about 15 minutes. And she believed she was having a stroke. She was able to communicate that to some degree. But by the time he got there, she was starting to get sick and incoherent. And he had a hard time getting her to the car, so he called an ambulance. They got her to the hospital in that Clear Lake area, which is where NASA is. It's still in Houston, the Houston area. And when they got her there, it's a local hospital. They roll her in. They think she's having a stroke. We're going to be able to reverse this, because they got her help so quickly. It was within an hour. And they did a CAT scan and determined that it was a hemorrhagic stroke rather than an ischemic stroke. And so they life flighted her into Houston. And the doctors determined when she got there that she was incompatible with life. That's what they called it. That's what they said. She was incompatible with life. I found these things out when we got to Houston. And they weren't going to do anything to save her, because, her eyes, they weren't reacting. They weren't reactive. Certain other signs, I guess, that doctors perform on patients to determine if they're compatible with life or not. They determined she was incompatible. And
how long did it take to get to that from when she was?
Not long.
This is all happening in
a
the
few
same
hours.
Day?
Yes. I'd say a few hours. It happened really quick. And, as far as the timeline, all I know is it was probably around 1 or lunchtime or something like that, 11, 12, sometime in that frame, that she called my stepdad. And then he gets her to the hospital. Then they have to life flight her. And obviously that takes time. And she's still bleeding at that point, and they couldn't stop it. And so, they get her to Houston. I would say probably, 5 o'clock, I would determine. Maybe around that time is when the doctors were evaluating. But when they were talking about her and they said she's incompatible with life, we're not going to do anything to save her, she flexed both of her feet. And that's not supposed to happen if you're incompatible with life. And so then they decided, we're going to try to save her. And so then they put her on the ventilator, and they started trying to they did a little surgery to try to, begin to drain the blood off of her brain. And then that's when I started to hear from family. We were at the ballpark with our oldest, who was playing baseball. And I didn't even hear my phone ring, and it probably rang and rang and rang. I think I had maybe 10 or 12 missed calls. And when you pick up the phone and see you have 10 or 12 missed calls from one of your siblings, immediately there's fear.
Sure.
And I remember standing there and looking at my phone, and I was like, I need to call my brother back. But I could not even figure out how to use my phone. I couldn't figure out where his number was. It's that kind of fear. And a friend of mine was standing next to me. She's like, tell me who we need to call. And she took my phone from me and she called him. And then that's when I found out what was going on. So
it's just so quick.
It was very quick.
What does it mean, incompatible with life?
I think that from their definition, what they're saying, or what they were saying, was that she was, I don't know if they were saying she was brain dead, because I don't think that brain dead was, I don't think they evaluated that. She had brain waves, because they eventually put her on whatever the wave machine is that shows your brain waves. She had many brain waves. So it wasn't that she was brain dead, but I think that they were talking about the amount of damage that was done to her brain when they determined what kind of bleed it was. And I mean, of course, I learned lots of medical terminology, and her bleed was bilateral, ventricular, and it was down to her brainstem. And so when something is going to affect your brainstem like that, then there's not much of a chance.
So is that some sort of rupture that took place, and it just bled so profusely because of the blood thinner, and that it happened so quickly at such a volume that nothing could be done?
Yes. Yeah. Because if there was an antidote for it, then they could have stopped the bleeding.
Yeah.
But they couldn't stop the bleeding. And so, because there's no antidote for this particular blood thinner. So, I think that just the amount of damage that the doctors believed that the bleeding had caused, the pressure in her brain, that obviously there was a lot of pressure and swelling and all of that. So I think that they believed there was no way she was going to come back from this.
It was too far.
She was too far gone. It was just too much. It was too much.
But then she flexed her feet.
She flexed her feet. Yes, because, if she had never called my stepfather would have gone home and just found her on the floor.
Right.
She just would have been gone.
Yeah.
But then he gets her to the hospital, and then they get her to the other hospital. And I'm so thankful for that, because none of this is good. None of this is a good situation. But to be able to have the opportunity to hold my mother's hand, and even though she couldn't respond to me, to be able to talk to her and to tell her everything I wanted to say to her, that meant a lot. So I was so thankful for those doctors and for those nurses that elected to help save my mother, or to try to save her. And in the beginning, when we get there, my older brother and I flew together from Birmingham, Alabama, to Houston. And we get to the hospital. My younger brother was already there. He had made the trip from Washington, D.C. to Houston. And he did not have good news. It was the next day, the day after all of this. She was still alive. We were trying to get to Houston to her very quickly, but we obviously couldn't go the night before. So we all started to make the trip the following day. He didn't have good news. That's when he told us that it was down to her brainstem and it was likely she was not going to survive. But still, to have those moments to be able to go in and hold her hand. And this is pre-COVID, so all of us could be with her, even in this ICU, several of us at a time anyway. And we could be with her for 22 hours out of the day. So all night, all day if we wanted. And that's what we did. So, those moments that when we got there to be able to sit with her, it seemed like she was coming out of the coma, because as they began to drain the blood off of her brain, I think what the hope was that she was going to be able to start coming out of it. And so she did. She started to come around a little bit, but she's on a ventilator.
And what was she doing that made you think she was coming out of it?
She woke up some. Her eyes were open a little bit. Some of her eyes began to react some as the nurses were checking them. And my stepfather, as he was leaning over her, talking to her, saw tears running out of her eyes. And that's unusual. And so it made him believe that she was there with him. There were times where she would look right at me and I would know that she was with me. And then there were other times where she couldn't even open her eyes, so she was in and out, and the sleepiness was caused by all of the blood on her brain, is what we were told. So, but they told us things like she can't regulate her temperature, and then the next day she would start to regulate her temperature, and so hope builds.
What were the doctors saying when these things were happening? Were they saying, "Well, this is normal, don't get your hopes up," or were they saying, "This is a little bit odd"?
So, doctors, especially neurologists, what I think about them, I think they're incredibly brilliant. I wonder if it's hard for someone who is smart enough to be a neurologist, especially at world-renowned hospital. I wonder if it's hard for them to navigate science and spirituality.
Yeah.
God and science, because they know what's supposed to happen. She's not going to wake up from this. She's not going to live. But then there's God. So what I found with the doctors was they were grave diggers, to put it bluntly. There wasn't much hope there from them, except for one doctor who said, these are the statistics. But then there's God. He was the only one there, the doctor anyway, that I felt like maybe was giving us a little bit of hope, because day after day, she continued to live. And she would go through parts or points where her blood pressure would bottom out, and then they would think she was going to die. And then she wouldn't, and everything would stabilize. Where her temperature wouldn't regulate, but then it would. And so, we took the things like her temperature regulating as a big step forward. And so we continued to have hope, because hope is the only thing you can have in that situation when you have a loved one laying there.
Yeah, I would think that would be an emotional roller coaster, right? I mean, you think she's
ups and downs.
She's gone.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden she responds.
Yes.
And this is just huge injection of hope into the room.
Right. Exactly. For the doctors to say, we're going to try to do whatever we can. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
And then you find yourself back in a place where it's like, well, how long did that go on?
3 weeks.
3 weeks of this.
Yes. Yeah. 3 weeks.
Renewed hope repeatedly.
Yes. Cycles, ups and downs. I remember one time where she was looking like she was not going to make it. She was going to pass away. And I remember going down to the chapel because I just couldn't sit there anymore. So I went down to the chapel just to pray and just to thank God for her life and to thank Him that she was in a place where at least I could hold her hand and I didn't have to just be faced with all of a sudden I don't have my mother anymore, There was still hope there. And I sat down in a pew, and I still have it. I carried it in my purse. It's a large chapel. I sat down on one of the pews, and there was a card sitting right next to me. And it was a verse from Isaiah where it talks about God holding you up in His mighty hand. And I've kept that card since, because in all the pews in all that chapel, that's where I sat. And in that moment, talking about the presence of God, I felt the presence of God in that moment after I read that. And so whoever left that note, it was handwritten, whoever left it, God bless them for doing that, for being someone who could see past their own pain because they were in that chapel for some reason. And to leave that for somebody that was going to need to hear that, need to read it, need to see it. So I've kept it all these years because it was very important. But yes, ups and downs. But I think anybody who's ever been in a neuro ICU could tell you that there's steps forward and steps back. It's very much ups and downs, highs and lows. I think after the first week that the doctors probably would have preferred that we decide to go ahead and remove her from life support because I don't think they believed that she was going to get better. None of us were really ready to make that decision yet. And so we came together as a family and determined we were going to give it another week. And it wound up being a couple of more weeks is what we did. We gave her a couple more weeks. And like I said, there were times where I thought she was with me. I thought she was hearing me. I would say, Mama, squeeze my hand, and she would squeeze it. The doctors would always say there's no possibility that she's doing that because of the kind of bleed this was. Even if she woke up, she would have no memory of who she was or who any of you were. You have no idea what the kind of brain damage she would have, what the extent of it would be. Would she be someone who could never function again? The doctors believed that the answer to that was yes. We finally came to the point, all of us together, that we were ready to say, let's let her go. Let's take her off the machine. Because they all told us when we turn off the machine, she's going to go very quickly. She won't survive probably a few minutes. And so that's what we were expecting. My younger sister probably was the closest to my mother. They had a very special bond. She struggled with this day more than any of us did.
I can't imagine.
And you know, it's a struggle for everybody, for every single one of us. She really struggled with it. It was a very difficult day. So we're sitting there and we all came around her, and my stepdad let us have a few moments by ourselves with my mother. I remember telling her, Mama, you did so good. You did so good. You had such a good life. You know, you did well. You did well. So please go on and be healthy and be whole and enjoy eternity. We knew where she was going, you know, so we knew that we'd see her again. And they turned the machines off, and she just breathes on her own. She did not die. And so that's one thing I look back, and God bless doctors. We need them. So thank goodness for them. Thank God for doctors. But they really don't know it all. And to be so confident and sure that she was going to pass away immediately or within a few minutes of them removing her from life support, and then for her not to, all of a sudden you're faced with, well, what do we do? What do we do in this situation? Well, the answer is that we send her to hospice. So we sent her to hospice. My sister and I stayed with her at night. My sister and I tended to be the people to stay with her at night.
What was that like? I'm sitting here thinking, you guys have gathered around.
Yeah.
Because the data shows, that's what doctors, I guess, are basing these decisions on, that when we turn off this ventilator, it was a ventilator, right?
It was a ventilator.
That it's going to be a matter of minutes, and she needs to be with her children in her last moments. Her children need to be with her. And so you, as a family, decide, as difficult as it had to be, that you were going to turn off this roller coaster of hope.
Yeah.
And you do.
I would say for earthly hope.
Right. Hope that she's going to come back to the mother that you knew before, right here on earth with you, right? Or some version of that. Right. That her life is going to be preserved on earth, that kind of hope. You know, every time she opens her eyes or squeezes your hand, it's has to be a burst of hope and energy that shoots through you. Yes. And when you turn that machine off, that's going to end. And it doesn't. And she keeps breathing. What was that like in the room? I mean, were you guys looking at each other and it's like, but she's still here. What was that like?
I was thankful.
Sure.
I was so thankful. You know, I was pregnant with my third and going through all of that. And so, you know, when you're faced with the situation where you're going to have to be with a parent who's passing away, then I think it's okay for you to be able to do whatever you need to do in order to be able to cope with that, because it's not an easy thing. It's hard if you've never had to hold the hand of someone you love as they pass away. And I remember right before I went to Houston, my OBGYN wrote me a prescription for something to kind of help calm my nerves a little bit. Yeah. Because she said, you've got to be healthy to take care of your baby. And so I didn't take any of what she prescribed me until the day that we were turning the machine off. And it honestly helped me. I was very clear. I was clear-headed, but I was calm too, because I knew this is what had to happen. We were releasing her. We were letting her go into eternity. But then when that didn't happen, I still had a calmness about it, about myself, I think. I just said, we're just going to sit here until she goes. We're just going to hold her hand. We're not going anywhere. And then it continued to go on, and they wound up moving her to a room in the hospital overnight, and my sister and I stayed. And that night, it was crazy. My sister can attest to this too. We just sat on her bed with her and held her hand, and she was more aware that night than I had seen her throughout the entire 3 weeks before.
What were the doctor's explanations of this?
I think they just continued to go back to the statistics.
Yeah.
She's not going to make it.
Right.
You're not seeing the things that you think you're seeing. I think that when you're in a situation like this, you just want to see something that's going to give you hope. And so sometimes it's hard to be a little objective about the things that are occurring. And so then you have the doctors walk in and tell you it's, you're not seeing what you think you're seeing.
What I'm seeing is that she's still alive, and you said she wasn't going to be.
Right.
So what do you say to that? Is my question to the doctors.
There wasn't.
Up, right?
That's right. Yeah. But really from that point forward, we weren't dealing with doctors anymore. We were dealing with the nurses who were so kind and prayed with us and gave us everything we needed. And so, I'm so thankful for nurses as well, because they're in the moment with you. They give you everything you need. They do everything you need. Good nurses do. And we had some great nurses. So my sister and I just continued to be thankful for every moment we had with her. We talked to her all night. She had her eyes open a great deal. She obviously couldn't speak to us, and she couldn't move or anything like that. But we just felt like we had moments with my mother that nobody else had in that whole 3 weeks. So, but the decision had been made to move her to hospice because, what's the alternative? A long-term care facility? I mean, that would have been it. And she would have been on a feeding tube, and which she already had because, we had given her every opportunity in the hospital stay for that 3 weeks. So we wanted to make sure she was getting the nutrition. So she got a feeding tube. And so I just think that when you're seeing those things happen, when you're seeing your mother kind of defying the odds of what the doctor had said, it just kind of gives you more hope, So this thankfulness comes into it, this feeling of hope. And then we go to hospice the next day. They transfer us down the street to an actual hospice. And they remove nutrition and they remove fluids, and we're going to let her go. My sister and I tended to stay with her at night. My brothers and my stepfather would come during the day, mostly. And she continued to live. And she lived for more days than the hospice doctors believed that she was going to. Her heartbeat was still strong. She was still making it. There was one night after we got there, maybe a couple nights into it, where my sister and I called my brothers and we said, you're going to need to come on because we think she may pass away tonight. She was really struggling that night with breathing, with all of it. And so we believed she was going to go. And they gave her some Ativan to help calm her down, I think. And then she completely did a 180 and everything kind of regulated. And she didn't pass away. But I look back at that night, and it was the first time the four of us, my two brothers and my sister, had spent together in years. And that night with my brothers and my sister is a very special night to me because the four of us surrounding my mom, praying over her, sleeping in the same room, being with her, that was a special night for us four. A very, very hard night for all of us, but a very special night, So I look back and I think that being able to have those moments with your siblings, it just gives you more strength for later on down the road for anything else that might come at you. The four of us have been through something so horrible together, and all it did was strengthen our bond and our relationship, I would say. So
now, how long are we into this thing from the day that she went to the hospital?
It's getting towards 4 weeks. Getting towards 4 weeks. And the hospice doctor came in and said, she's still making it. Her heartbeat's still strong. I don't see her passing away in the next couple of days. It could still be a week from now. And we were approaching Mother's Day at that point. And my younger brother said, you all go home and be with your families. I'll stay here with Mom. And then when you come back, then I'll go home. And so we kind of made the switch. Before we left, one of the last nights we were there, I had a dream while we were in hospice. And I woke up having felt like I had truly communicated with my mother in this dream. In the dream, she was sitting in a chair in hospice, and she was wearing a robe, a green robe that she wore when we were kids. I remember this robe. And she looked just like she did, with half of her head shaved because they had drains in her head. And she would have hated that, by the way. She was glamorous, and she would not have been happy about that look, but at all. She probably would have been mad at my stepdad for letting them shave her head. But in the dream, I look at her and I said, Mama, do you know where you are? And she nodded her head. I said, well, Mama, do you know what happened to you? And she nodded her head. And then that was the end of the dream. But when I woke up, I felt like I had truly communicated with her. And death and dying is such a spiritual process to me, such a spiritual process. And so I don't discount anything as being out of the realm of possibilities when it comes to the process of dying. And so I truly believed that I had communicated with my mother, that maybe God had allowed me to communicate with her in some way. Sometimes when my brothers and my sister and I would start arguing a little bit over the whole situation, are we doing what's right? Are we not doing what's right? Because there was some division throughout the entire process. I mean, there was. I would look over and see my mother's face just like cringing.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, she's responding to that.
We felt like she was. And I remember my sister pointing out one day and saying, y'all better be quiet because you're making Mom mad over there. And we would look, and she'd look like she was just making that face she would make at us when we were kids. So I do think that she was, I think she was with us at times. Some nurses would tell us there's a possibility she's just locked in, which means she can't communicate, but she is thinking. And other nurses and doctors would say, she's not there. She probably can't even see or hear. I mean, it was to that extent. So I think the brain is just a mystery. I think it's a mystery to doctors and nurses. I just think neurology
you're
is
dealing
just
with
hard.
the most complex.
I think so. Well, when my younger brother told us, you go on home, y'all go home, go see your families, go be with your families, because all of us had spouses who were very supportive.
Have y'all been gone for a month?
We had not. We had kind of gone back and forth, but really none of us had been gone very long. I mean, we were there for a week or two at a time. So we had spouses that were very supportive of us, very supportive of our desire and our need to be with our mother. And so that's a blessing to have someone in your life who will say, yes, go, I've got this.
It certainly is.
Especially when all four of us had children.
A lot of kids.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
young children. A lot of us had young children. So my younger brother texted me one night, and I was at home with my family, and he said, I feel like I've just seen a ghost. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, I was just reading out of the Bible to Mom. I was reading the story of Jonathan and David. And his name is Jonathan David. So he was reading this story to her. And he looked over at her, and she was looking straight at him. And it was probably the first time she'd opened her eyes in a while. And he said, Mama, are you here with me? And he'd say, can you blink your eyes? And she would start communicating with him by blinking her eyes. And he said, I asked her numerous questions and asked her to blink her eyes in response. And she did. And he said, I don't understand this. Because to that point, John was starting to really side with the doctors on all of this. He was really starting to believe she was not there. There was no way she was there. And so for him to witness that and to have those moments with her was kind of jarring to him. And that's when I told him that I had had that dream about Mom. And he said, well, why didn't you tell me this? And I just had to tell him it's just something that was kind of personal to me. It wasn't anything that I thought you would look at and say, oh, we need to take her out of hospice, because of that one dream. But he called my stepdad. He called my stepsister, who's a nurse. She also believed when she got there that my mom was communicating. And it's not easy to take someone out of hospice when they've been in hospice. I mean, obviously she didn't have nutrition. She didn't have fluids. But when my stepfather got there, he got with the doctors. And because we wanted to give her every opportunity to make it or to come through this, we decided to move her back to the hospital for observation. And so they move her back. She probably was in hospice for close to 2 weeks. So we're about 5 weeks into this. So we go back to the hospital, and those moments just seem to be kind of fleeting. The communication, the hope. And so they did keep her in the hospital for a little while to observe. The doctors didn't feel like it was anything. If they had really witnessed what they said they witnessed, it was something that was fleeting. So, but that kind of started the journey of us saying, let's give her every shot at being able to make it through this. And so we went on for another 2 or 3 months like this. And, finally my stepfather had to make the decision that it was over and done with. We were going to remove nutrition, remove food, remove fluids, and just let her go. And I think at that point, the 4 of us, with the exception of my younger sister, we were to the point where, yes, it's time. And I remember my sister and the conversation I had to have with her about it. And she would say, something along the lines of, I don't know what Mom wants us to do for her. I don't know if this is the right thing. And I would say, but you do know. You do know. You know what the right thing to do is, because at this point in her care, at this point in the situation, it's time for us to let her go. And she would tell us that. We know she would tell us that. And so that decision, it was easy at that point to say, yes, let's go. Let's just go ahead and let her go. Easy to say that's where we need to be in our care. Hard to let her go.
Oh yeah. I mean,
hard to let her go.
You don't get to reverse that decision.
You don't. No. And throughout the entire thing, prayer obviously was something that I depended on and relied on that time with God to try to come to terms with the situation. But I would say I really struggled with how to pray during all of that, because it became more and more clear that this was God's will for our mother's life. But I couldn't pray that, because if I did pray it, then it meant that I was saying that I was okay with it. But if I say, dear Lord, let your will be done here. If I said that, then I was basically telling God I'm okay with it. That's the way I felt in that moment. And I couldn't pray, if this is your will. I could not say those words to him because I was too scared that it was his will.
Thy will be done is something that we say when we're praying the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. But it's one of the hardest things for us ever to say.
Yeah. It was very, very hard. It was a hard prayer to pray.
Yeah.
Hard prayer to pray.
So, I think back sort of over the entirety of this. This is a 4-month window.
It was about 4 months. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you so caught up in the seemingly nonstop engagement in the moment that you didn't have time to grapple with God about it and look at the spiritual side and or did you was there any resentment or anger toward God? Was there lots of questions around it? What was your dialogue with God during this time?
I think when you're in that moment and you're actually in the situation, at least the way it was for me, was that I was just trying to survive. And so my prayer, as long as she was breathing, was for him to heal her. That was my prayer. There was not, I don't remember anger or resentment during that entire 4 months. It was just a great deal of sadness over all of it, because my mom was the one we thought would live until she was 95. We thought she would be here dancing on her 90th birthday. And so to have a loved one's life cut what you feel like is short, it just brings about so much sadness. And so for me, I don't think there was anger during that time period. There was just a lot of grief, sorrow, and sadness.
Not spiritual peace, I wouldn't think.
There was no peace in that. No, not until we came to the point towards the end where my mom was such a on-the-go kind of person, and it wasn't right for her to be laying in a bed and for us to keep her here. But that's something I really struggled with in the beginning. Is it God's will for us to keep her on nutrition and fluids, to keep her alive? Because surely if he wanted her, he would take her no matter what. So I really went through that. We aren't keeping her alive by giving her nutrition and fluids, because God can take her anytime he wants to. That was my rationale for keeping her on fluids and nutrition and keeping her on that ventilator for as long as we did and all of that. I don't know why God does the things he does when he does them. I don't know how all that works. But I do know that in the time that we were dealing with all of this, he was consistently there.
What do you mean?
As far as people in our lives that I feel like were placed in our lives, going back a few years, the orchestration of friendships prior to this even occurring, and that's if that's something that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I want to know what you're talking about there.
So a few years before, when our oldest was playing 5-year-old All-Stars, it was in 2015. So a couple years before all of this, we wound up on one of the All-Star teams that we weren't sure we were going to wind up on this particular team. We wound up on this team when we could have been on another one. And I always look back at that and think that was orchestrated by God. And the reason I believe that is because the coach's wife of this particular team lost her mother a year before I did. And we formed a strong friendship while we were on that team together. And I never would have had the opportunity to meet this person and to become friends with her and to ultimately have her as a source of strength for me when I lost my mother a year after she lost hers. Because we never did play with this particular coach again. And so that was the only opportunity I really had to form the kind of relationship I formed with her. And to see her go through the loss of her mother a year later, for me to walk the exact same path a year after she did. And not only that, there's not a lot of people I know or friends that I have that have lost their mothers or a parent, mother or a father at this point in our lives. Thank goodness. I'm glad for that. But she was really one of the only people that I knew. I knew a few, but not many. And to be able to have someone that consistently checked in with me, but not only checked in with me, was able to provide spiritual guidance throughout the entire situation. I'll go back and read her text messages, which were like books from time to time, because her wisdom is unmatched. And everyone should have a friend like this person to be able to guide you through this and to provide support to you. And I wouldn't have had that if we had not been on that team. And so I look back 2 years before this even happened at the orchestration of this friendship forming. I look at that.
Are there other instances where you feel like he was setting you up to take care of you, to carry you?
Yeah, I do. So my first baby came very easily, and we wanted to have a baby, and we had a baby. It was very simple. Our second child was not as easy, and there was a miscarriage in between my first and my second, and just some struggles. Thank goodness I had great doctors, and we were able to have our second child. But my doctor told me, if you ever want to have a third, which I don't think was in the cards for us. I didn't think at that time it was in the cards for us. I thought that my husband felt like it was just, we were good with our 2 kids. We were happy and healthy and everything was good. And that was it. She told me, if you ever want to have a third, you will probably have to have some help again. I don't think it's going to happen just naturally for you. And then when my middle child was 6 months old, we found out we're pregnant with our third, and there had been no help. And so I look at that, being pregnant during that whole situation with my mother, and the day he was born, 2 months after she passed away, I look at that as a gift of mercy and of God's grace. Certainly not everybody has a baby when they lose somebody, but I believe it was what God knew that I needed to be able to get through this entire situation.
All right. So if I am looking at this thing from the big picture and from what I feel like I'm hearing you say, it almost sounds like to me you're saying, at minimum, he knows what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly he's God. We believe that omnipotent, omnipresent, everything, not confined to space and time. He clearly would know what's coming. Mm-hmm. And that knowing what's coming, he is putting things in place in your life to use to carry you through this ordeal. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I believe that. Yeah.
Because some people say, did he cause that to happen to your mom?
Yeah. Like, is my mom the sacrifice for my child? Or...
Yeah, or is you something like that, or your own spiritual growth, or things that have to happen for you. Is she the sacrifice for things that have to happen for you, your siblings, and all the other people around? Where do you fall in how you view God's role in all of it?
Yeah, the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my thoughts on the sovereignty of God, and these thoughts aren't necessarily something that I came to on my own. Obviously, it's things that you read or you listen to, or a parent, my father, who is very wise, and he's in the Word, and he's a spiritual leader for me. So conversations with him, I think, have kind of helped me get to the point of where I do feel the way I feel. I think to believe that God caused this pain in my life would be very contradictory to the fact that he's a loving, kind, good, and merciful God. And that's who I know him to be. That's who I believe him to be. So I personally do not believe that God struck my mother down. I believe that we live in a fallen world where there is sin, and we are responsible for that. We're responsible for our sin. But at the same time, God is still in every single detail of our lives. And I think that he began to knit together these circumstances and situations that would allow us, me, my family, my sister, my brothers, my stepfather, to be able to get through this situation because he knew the pain that was going to be coming. So I don't necessarily think that God struck her down, if that's what we're talking about. So I don't think he caused it. I just think it's a part of free will This is where we live in a world where the Bible says you're not promised an easy life. You will have trials. You will have tribulations. We expect death. We expect hurt. We know those things are going to happen. But where I see the loving God is in the people he put in my life, the baby that he sent me, that I'm forever grateful for, to be able to have that child during that time in my life. What a gift. Such a gift. So no, I don't think that he caused it, but I think that he has helped knit together the things that he knew I would need to be able to strengthen my relationship with him and to be able to speak about this and hopefully help somebody else. Because I think that has to be the result of a tragedy like this, is for me to be able to speak about God, my relationship with him, my mother's relationship with him, the situation where I know my mother is. And the reason that I have hope today is because of the cross. And so I think that maybe it's not that God did this, but he knew there could be good to come from it. And here's the good. He's weaving it all together. And God's sovereignty to me, through a conversation with my father, hearing him say this, God's sovereignty isn't about one event in our lives. It's about the entirety of our lives. It's about making it to the goal at the end of our lives of eternal life with him in heaven. And his sovereignty is being in every single detail to get us to that point and to get as many people to that point of where they will also be in eternity with us, with Jesus and with God one day. So I can't look at this one event, this one thing that happened to my mom, this tragedy that happened to our family. I can't look at that and question God's sovereignty because of this one event. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I know that there are a lot of people that claim to lose their faith because of an event like this. They don't see it with that angle, with that perspective. Mm-hmm. They can't understand how a loving God can allow suffering to that degree. Now, pain is actually a gift if you look at it in other ways. Let's not talk about emotional pain for a second, but let's just talk about physical pain, right? The existence of pain. You know, in our world today, we do everything we can to avoid pain. We get a little headache and we're pumping the ibuprofen, right? We can't have any pain, right? But pain saves our lives, right? Mm-hmm. If I feel a shooting pain down my left arm and it doesn't go away, that is my body telling me that I am headed for a quicker death than normal. That's a symptom of a heart attack. And it's given me a chance, it's a warning, to do something about it. So it saves my life. Pain saves my life in that situation. The purpose of pain is actually to save our lives, to save us. It is a gift that we have that keeps us alive. If a child puts their hand on or anyone puts their hand on a hot stove and does not feel the pain instantly, well, they will lose the use of their hand. But the point of it is, I guess, that pain is a gift. It's a tool, especially when you look at it in the physical sense. But when we start looking at it with emotional pain, that kind of hurt affects us long term.
Yeah.
And I hear of many people that don't have the perspective that you just mentioned, and that they turn from faith because they can't understand why pain of that magnitude, especially if it's born of evil, Okay, so I don't think your mom's situation was born of evil. I think the brutal molestation of a child
Right.
is born of evil. So that probably opens up a whole new box of questions there. But the importance of pain, or the gift of pain, do you see it as that at all?
So I think that there's purpose in your pain.
Right.
And I think that the purpose is to draw you closer to Christ. Because if you're closer to Christ, then you have hopefully you can at least come to a point where you have peace about it. And having peace about it allows you then to serve others in their time of need, and to spread the message of Christ, and to spread the message of what he's done in your life. And so I do see purpose in pain. I think that it goes back to what the Bible says about not being promised that this life is not going to be painful. You know, I mean, you look at the story of Job. I think that losing everything you have and still worshiping God, that's what I would aspire to be.
Isn't just this a decision, or just a matter of perspective and the way you choose to view it? Because I believe people carry that resentment to the grave.
Mm-hmm.
I think that things happen to some people and they never, ever, and it's almost a badge of honor that they remain bitter the remainder of their lives. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. And I do think it's a matter of perspective. I, in my whole life, have never been one to question God. My parents raised me in church. They raised me to be a Christian. And I personally, just my personality, how I am, I've never once doubted it. I know there are people who do doubt it. But I guess that even in the worst situations, I can see God's goodness and I can see his mercy. And I do think it's a matter of perspective. And I think that anyone who turns from God in a situation like this, it's a horribly sad situation, because you have no hope at that point. Without God, without his promises, without the cross, we have no hope. Now, today, sitting here, I miss my mother every single day, but I know where she is. I know she's sitting at the feet of Jesus with her parents and her older brother. And I know she would not return to this earth to the people she loved enormously if she had the chance. And to me, that says everything I need to know about eternity. And so I look to the cross when I start to question, or if I start to question, anything related to God and his sovereignty. I just think that turning from God means you've lost all hope. And I couldn't survive this without the hope of Christ.
Yeah, and I hear people talk about, I can't serve a God that would do a thing like that. And I can't, we will never understand all the precise whys of why God does anything. So whenever somebody comes to me and says, well, why would God do this? I always say, well, don't ever ask me why God would do anything. If he is infinite in intelligence and goodness, which we believe strongly that he is, there's lots of evidence to point to that, then I got no chance at telling you why, right? We can speculate. The why that he tells us is that though you cannot see it right now, in the larger scheme of things, the why is going to result in something better than what is going on right now. And you have to trust me on that.
And it may not even have anything to do with you.
No, right.
I mean, my mother's death, the ripple effects may not have anything to do with me. I mean, there could be things that Jesus or the Lord has done since this event that I will never know about.
Oh, sure. Well, and I think a way to say that is it's not only affecting you.
Right.
It's affecting a ripple effect is a great way to put it, because it goes out in literally every single possible direction.
Right.
Right. And so I see it as that. But I'm trying to get to the person who's keeping the resentment, who says, nope, you took my mom.
Yeah.
My mom's the most important person in my life. Or you took my child.
Mm-hmm.
Or you took my spouse. And I'm not getting over this. And I don't believe a loving God would do a thing like that. And I cannot believe for that reason. In fact, there can't even be a God.
I hope that those are more extreme cases. I'm sure they're not. I cannot imagine living this life without the hope of eternity, without the hope of seeing my mother again one day, without the hope of being with her in eternity with Jesus Christ one day. I can't imagine that. And so to me, having chosen to choose hope over fear, over resentment, over anger, my life is so much better today because I can thank God in every circumstance, right? He asks us in the Bible to be thankful in everything.
Are you able to be thankful?
Yes.
About your mom's passing?
I am able to be thankful for her life, what she meant to people. The messages that I received following her passing, one of them was from a good friend in college, and I'd never heard her talk about my mother like this. But my mom always liked the ones, my friends, who were maybe a little more of the troublemakers.
Your mom did?
She did. I think she was kind of like a stray dog type mentality. She was always going to nurture and care for those that she felt really needed it. And I felt like this my whole life. She just kind of tended to gravitate towards those that she felt really needed some kind of good influence in their lives. And one of my friends in college, this person was a great person, but she didn't feel a lot of self-worth. And I think my mother gave her self-worth because the message that she sent me following her death was just beautiful. And it was talking about the way my mom made her feel every time she was around her, and made her feel like she was a daughter of the King, and that she needed to have that self-worth because Jesus believed that she was worth him dying on the cross for her. And so I can be thankful for things like that. I can be thankful for my child who bears my mother's name, my mother's maiden name, my youngest. I can be thankful for friendships that the Lord placed in my life. I can be thankful for the compassion and empathy that I now have. I think I was always a compassionate person just by nature. But when you lose someone like this, the way that I lost my mom, or the way we lost her, I think it just gives you a whole different level of compassion and empathy. And I think I'm able to then go and be the hands and feet of Jesus to people who are going through what I've already been through. So I'm thankful for that. So I think that when God asks us to give thanks in all of our circumstances, he means all of our circumstances. And he's not asking us to thank him for my mother having a stroke that ultimately took her life. I think he's asking us to be thankful for the ripple effects. Be thankful for her life and what she meant to people. And I personally would much rather be a thankful person today than a bitter person.
But it's a decision, right? And
I think that some of it may be in your nature. how you are, what your personality is like, but I also think it's a choice. Because when you go through grief, anger's a part of it. And I can remember the times when I felt immense anger as I was grieving. And I would pray, why would you do this? You could heal her. Why wouldn't you? And then that would all of a sudden be replaced by, something, the next stage in the grieving process. And so the anger for me never really lasted very long. And it's because I think that I have the peace of Christ. And so if anybody is listening who is either going through something like this or has been through something like this, there is peace in Jesus Christ. And so you just have to turn back to him to receive that peace. And you have to be open to receiving that peace. Because if your heart's not open and if it is hardened, then you have to be open to coming back to Christ, to praying to him for him to soften your heart. Because like I said earlier, hope is the only thing stronger than fear. And if I'm a hardened individual, if I'm someone who is bitter, then that means to me, I'm fearful. And hope is stronger than fear. Hope is stronger. It's one of the best emotions to me. Hope is an amazing thing to have. While my mother was living, my hope was that she was going to survive. When she was dying and when it became, evident to us that she was not going to live, that was not God's plan for us and for her, my hope became Jesus Christ. It became fixed upon him and the cross.
Yeah, you talked about being thankful. You're not thankful that she had a stroke and is gone, but you're thankful for the things that have happened beyond that. For some reason in my mind, the pruning of like a rose bush or a limb comes to mind, right? When you prune, right, you have to literally cut the thing off. Mm-hmm. But from that springs forth multiple versions in all different directions. And so the fruit from that multiplies. It's not that there wasn't pain in the pruning, right? And I'm not saying that your mom's death is a pruning, right? It's just, it's a source of pain. And if you just decide to abide in the pain itself, you never allow yourself to see fruit come from it. And so when I listen to you, I'm picturing that, and I'm like, she's not saying that she is thankful for the wound that is the pruning. What she's saying she's thankful for is things that have resulted from that. The new growth in other areas, that's what she's thankful for. And she sees her mom as the fuel for those things and the life that she lived. And she's able to be grateful and thankful for all of what her mom is and was and continues to be, and the ways that she will continue to live through all this exponential growth that has come from her life. And I think that's a decision. I think I think you make a great point. If we decide to remain defiant and hard because we are unable to see a greater perspective, a longer-term perspective than the immediacy of our pain, that we do ourselves a great disservice, and we miss out on good. And I think that's what you're saying in this.
Yeah. I think that our trials and our tribulations have the ability to strengthen our faith. But it's something you have to be open to. God is going to meet you where you are. He met me in so many valleys, on so many circumstances, so many times over the entire 4 months. And since He comes to you where you are, but you also have to be open to it. And I remember one night just talking about the presence of God and how I felt him throughout that situation. I remember this theme of "it is well with my soul" just kind of popping up all the time throughout the whole situation. Whether it was something that a friend would say to me, or if it was something I was tagged in on social media, something related to "it is well with my soul," which to me is a beautiful song. I mean, it is. Beautiful hymn. But I didn't respond to that very well, because the truth is, it's not okay with me. It never will be. It won't. It's still not okay with me that my mother isn't here, that she's gone. It's not okay. That whole situation was hard. And it's not okay with me even today. And that is something I still struggle with, being okay with it. But I don't think we have to be okay with it. And I didn't realize that. The whole situation, the whole time I kept thinking, this is obviously God's will, so I have to get my mind wrapped around the fact that it's God's will, so I need to be okay with it. And people were saying this to me in one way or another. And that was just kind of the theme that I was feeling. So one night I was driving home from the airport, and the airport is about 45 minutes or an hour or so away from where we live, the international airport. And so that was my time to be in prayer before I returned to the chaotic life that we live, with a baby, with being pregnant, with having an older child, marriage, everything, work. And so I spent that 45 minutes or an hour grieving a great deal, praying a great deal, and listening to music, because music was a source of strength to me. I mean, it's always been a source of strength to me. Music's very important in my life. And so I was listening to a song that Carrie Job sings, called "You Are Not Alone," or "I Am Not Alone," I Am Not Alone. And it is a beautiful song. If you've never heard it before, you should listen to it, because it is a beautiful song about grief and grieving and God's mercy throughout that entire process. And there's a part in the song where she sings, "You bring healing to my soul." And when she sang that, I heard it as clear as day, not in some big booming voice, but just a feeling that came over me, words that popped into my head. I just heard God telling me, I don't expect this to be okay with you. And that's okay. This does not have to be okay with you, but I will heal your soul. And in that moment, I can't tell you the peace that came over me. And as I'm driving home, thinking, it's okay. God says it's okay that I'm not okay with this. I've been struggling with it for the last few months, trying to get okay with it, trying to be okay with it, because it was obvious that this is what his plan was. And he wanted me to be okay with it because all these people were telling me that I needed to be okay with it. And then I get to the point where I hear her sing that, and then God tells me, it's okay. It doesn't have to be okay with you. I don't expect it to be, but I'm here and I'm going to heal you. I was in such a deep valley that night driving home that I needed to hear that. I needed God to tell me that so that I could move on from the burden of feeling like I had to be okay with this. And he took it from me. And I feel like it would just lay things down at his feet instead of saying, Lord, if it's your will. Instead, just turn it over to him and just let his will happen. And to me, I think that laying things at his feet, turning them over, is such a relief. It's such a relief. And at that point, that's when I think I was able to say, I can't do this on my own. I can't be everything I need to be to everybody in my life, and be in Houston, and be at home, and be with my mother. Because leaving my mother was very hard. It was always very hard. Because I was leaving her when I felt like she needed me. I felt like she needed me. That was a huge burden on my heart. But to be able to finally place it at the feet of Jesus and say, please take over. I'm giving this to you. At that point, I was able to have a little peace about the whole situation. And that's when things started to kind of move a little bit more and going towards, we're going to let her go. I'm going to let her go be healthy and whole. I know where she's going, and my mom deserves it. She deserves for us to let her go. And I think that laying it at the feet of Jesus, I was able to come to that conclusion and to help one of my siblings come to that conclusion, because it was hard for her too. That whole situation, that whole letting it go, giving it to God. That's difficult because as humans, I think we just want to have control. We want to have control.
It's the original sin, right? It is us saying, hey, we got this.
Yeah.
We'll be God.
Yeah.
That's right. And the truth of the matter is, we do everything we can to heal ourselves. And so I'm listening to you in that, and you're basically feel like you're taking the steps that you are being told to take, or coached to take, or
right.
that you got to do. Here's what I got to do to get myself over this and past it, and that sort of thing. And what you realized, what God told you, is like, you know what? The only one that can heal you is me.
Mm-hmm.
So let me do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you stop trying to do it.
Yeah.
And when you feel the way you feel, that's all right.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to heal you.
Yes.
And I find, I lost my dad,
mm-hmm.
and it's a couple years. And I don't want to get off on that right now. So normally I would say I don't know the experience, but in this case I actually do. But I find in my own life that the times that I have had the most peace, it wasn't when I just stopped doing things. It was when I stopped trying to do everything.
Yeah.
And I've gotten in situations before where I was so over my head and so out of my league in what I thought I was trying to solve or deal with, that I finally say, you know what? I got no business trying to do this. The only one that can do this is you. Mm-hmm. The only one that can do this, God, is you. And so I'm just going to ask you to do it. And I hope you don't think that that's me being lazy. It's not. It's just me realizing that you're God.
And I'm not.
And I'm not.
Yeah.
You are the author of life. You don't have a limited capacity in what you can do. In fact, you've taught us that you are God and that you want us to give these things to you. Mm-hmm. That you actually are inviting us to fall back into sort of your arms here.
Mm-hmm. And that's a peaceful place to be.
But it's a hard thing to do.
It is. It is.
But you're right. It is a peaceful place to be.
It is.
But you still kind of have to, like, the old, I don't know, ropes course deal, or where you get the team behind you and you fall back and they got to catch you or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that kind of faith. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the beginnings of what this actually looks like in life when your mama dies.
Yeah.
Or when you lose the job. Mm-hmm. Or you lose your child. So when we talk about people who are responding to these things that happen in their lives with ongoing bitterness, we're not saying that you have to be okay with it in your experience. What we're saying is, be open to the only one that can bring about peace.
Because that's a better place to be than being bitter. You know, I can't imagine living life as in a state of bitterness and anger, because there's too much good that you don't get to be a part of or have in your life if you're living in that state. I just think there's too much that God can do in our lives if we just let him. And so my message to anyone who has gone through something that has made you turn away from God, if you just give it another chance and lay down your sorrow, your bitterness, your anger, lay it at the feet of Jesus and just see what he does. Just see what he does with it.
Yeah, don't use your bitterness or sorrow as a weapon or a tool.
Yeah.
You got to put it down. And it's a choice you got to make.
Yeah.
And history and people like you and others tell us, it's like, I did it. I did that. Not that I'm some great, pious, saintly person, but I chose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better. And it's
so
like not
much
even
better.
close, right?
No, no, there's no comparison.
Yeah.
No, because in those moments that I would feel immense anger, it's a little scary because it can separate you from God almost. I mean, it can, your anger. And I don't want to be separated from God. I want the hope and the promise and the peace of the cross. So that's...
When you say peace of the cross, what do you mean?
When I see the cross, I know what it represented. I know it represents the crucifixion of Christ. It was horrific, that event. But I see it as being a beautiful symbol of peace in my life. Because if I'm not worrying about my salvation or about where my mom is or if I'm going to see her again or anything, then I have peace. And Jesus Christ gives me peace. I guess that's it.
Yeah, and for me that means, so he's the author of life. He's the one that made all of it. Mm-hmm. God is what we understand as three persons, Father and Son and Holy Spirit. And so Son is Jesus. And so he tells us that he was there in the beginning. And so when he speaks the truth of the way he designed it to work. So he is Jesus, we recognize as Christians, we recognize Jesus as God come down in human form. Mm-hmm. Okay? They were one, are one. And so when he describes the way he designed it to work, those are sort of his commandments, and they're very counterintuitive to the way the world works, which is beautiful in itself and amazing. And so when he asks us to follow those, he's not requiring us to worship and be loyal to him. I believe he's doing that because he loves us, and he knows that is the path to our own fulfillment and joy and eternity with him. But the peace of the cross, to me, is him saying, okay, so humanity, I designed it to work a certain way, and you decided, because I loved you, I gave you the ability to choose. You're not just puppets that I'm manipulating the whole time. You get to decide. Without that, there's no love if you're forced to do everything. Mm-hmm. So you get to choose. But you chose to reject the way I designed it to work. You chose to be in charge. You chose to be God. You chose to be me. You can't do what I do because you're not me. You're not eternal and infinite in intelligence and goodness and all these other things. You're very finite. So you're not equipped to do this. So you made a big mistake there. But instead of me being ticked at you like I should be, I've chosen to create a path for you to get back into right relationship with me. Not for me, but for you. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to show you the most extraordinary love there could ever be. I'm going to take my own. Instead of you paying for your decisions, what we know as sin, you being God, I'm not just going to say, you don't owe me anything. I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to pay for it with the life of my very own son. So you think you went through hurt? Let me tell you something. I sacrificed my son for you. For you. And so all you have to do is accept that love and mercy that I'm pouring onto you. That is the peace of the cross. And for me, and when you do that, when you accept the gift that I've given you, you just get to enjoy an eternity of peace, starting right now. I hear you talk about the peace of the cross, and I ask myself, what does that mean? And I think a lot of us talk about it, and we do know what it means, but we don't articulate that. Yeah. And so when we realize that, and when you think about it in those kinds of terms, yes, it sucks that we have death and pain. But suddenly, the sting of it lessens.
It does.
Because like, oh, wait, I see a bigger picture here, right? There is eternity ahead. And I didn't do anything to deserve it. I've just been handed it. All I got to do is reach out and grab the gift that I've been handed, like my mom did. And I'm just going to be with her forever in a place of eternal peace.
You know, I look at the birth of my son, my third, 2 months after my mother passed away. And my brother, one of my brothers, and my sister and I and my stepfather were blessed enough to be with her as she passed. And I prayed very hard about that because I knew we were going to Houston because she was going to be dying. We knew that. We didn't know how long it was going to take or anything, but I knew that's what I was going to do. And to be with my mom as she passed away, I count it as one of the most precious moments of my life because I got to witness, not necessarily with my eyes, her falling into the arms of Jesus. And that is a gift. And as it happened, was there sorrow? Oh yeah, deep sorrow. But there was also a peace because I knew she was in the arms of Jesus in that moment. And she was no longer living on earth suffering as she had for 4 months, you know. There was no longer anything but comfort, joy, happiness for her because of where I knew she was. And so when I think about the peace of the cross, I think about that. That's how I think, because my mom and you and me and everybody we know, we've been given the opportunity to have eternal life through the peace of the cross. And when you think about God's sovereignty, if we believe everything the Bible says, and the Bible talks very specifically about God creating or being involved in every detail of our lives, of the world, he's in everything. So that means he was involved in every detail of the crucifixion, which would lead to the Jesus Christ rising from the dead and saving us from ourselves. So if we don't believe that God is involved in every detail, then the cross means nothing. It just is an event that happened. You know, to me, we have to believe God was involved in that. And the thing was, him being involved in all of the details working in many different ways for all of that to happen the way that it did, for him to allow that to occur, he was basically providing a path for those who crucified Jesus to be saved. Those who put him on the cross then had a path to heaven through Jesus Christ, to a relationship with God. If that's not love, I don't know what is.
That's and that's a brilliance that can only be God, right?
That, I mean,
know who's coming up with that.
It's a little profound. It's not mine.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, the fact that it happened is
yes,
a story that's hard to be written.
Yeah, it is. Or, I think that just the things that come from tragedy, the gifts that God gives you, if you're open to them. When my third child was born, through that process of my mother being sick and being pregnant, I didn't really want to have a baby because I didn't want to have a baby without my mother. And so that was a very hard time for me to think about going to the hospital and doing this without my mom, because I had not done it without her before and I didn't want to do it without her again. And I cried probably the entire day we were going to the hospital, all the way to the hospital, spoke to my sister on the phone the entire night in the hospital, the night that we checked in. And so I just didn't want to do it. And then the next day he was born. And it's like all of a sudden this gift of mercy and grace and love has been given to me. And I understood it. I knew why he had been given to me. I knew. And I experienced an emotion that I think is beautiful. Joy through my sorrow. Experiencing joy through your sorrow is an incredible emotion. But you have to be open to it. Because if you can't allow God to work in your life in those ways so that you can experience something like joy through sorrow, then I just think you're missing out on the gifts of God, the things that he does for you, the things he gives you when you most need it, if you're not open to it. Joy through sorrow is an incredible emotion.
It comes back to the pain thing we talked about before. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you could win a sports let's just say football, because we're in football country, right? But you can win a football game 40-0, and it's like, yes, we won. But when you have a game and your starting quarterback goes down, you're down by 3 touchdowns with 4 minutes to go, and you're pretty much beat. And you end up winning the game. Both of those are wins.
Yeah.
But which one's the more joyful, the sweeter, the most memorable, mm-hmm. the one that builds your character, that turns into good?
Yeah.
Without pain,
mm-hmm.
you don't get that kind of joy.
Mm-mm. It is a joy unlike any other. It is. And I didn't see it until the day he was born. And so I look at that as being a gift of mercy. God is a merciful God. He gave me a gift that day. And he continues to give me that gift. I still experience joy through sorrow 4 years later. It's, I don't grieve every single day anymore. There are times where my sister and I are able to share a story and laugh about our mom. And I'm grateful and glad to be to that point where I can share a story about my mother and just laugh rather than cry. But grief will be a part of my life forever, I think, in some way, shape, or form. Because I'll always miss her. I'll always want her here. But at the same time, I'm grateful and glad and happy for the time that I had her, because the work that I do in higher education with students has given me a new perspective. When one of them comes to me and says they have lost a parent, a mom or a dad, the compassion I have for them as a teenager or as a 20 or 21-year-old losing a parent, gosh, that just makes me so much more grateful for the time that I had with my mom. I had her into my 30s. And not everybody has a parent, a mom or a dad into their 30s. And so I'm grateful for that. I thank God that I had my mom as long as I had her. So going back to perspective, I think it's a matter of our perspective. I think it's how you choose to be, what you choose in your life. Every day when I wake up, I want to choose hope. I want to be hopeful for heaven, hopeful that my mom can be a part of special moments in our lives, because we have all felt her in special moments in our lives. Coincidences are never really coincidences. So we've all been able to feel her. And I think I think we're able to feel her through the Holy Spirit. I think the Holy Spirit connects us to our mom. And I think that we have, being able to have a relationship with God allows me to be able to feel her through the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Well, life is a spiritual experience. Mm-hmm. And those who don't participate in that are I feel like, missing some of the amazing flavors mm-hmm. of life. What else have you learned about God?
He gives you what you need when you need it. You just have to be able to accept it. He is merciful and good, even in horrible times. He weeps with us. He cares for us like nobody else could. He's a faithful God. Faithful in everything that I need from him. I think of one time when I was in Houston and I was in the hotel room and I was just laying in my bed listening to music. And I was in this state of bargaining with God. Mm-hmm. I was begging him to save my mom. And I knew the situation was so dire that medicine was not going to be able to save her. And so I was telling him, if you'll just save her, there will be no doubt that you are the one that saved her. You are the only one who can save her. And I promise you that if you do this, I will never stop shouting it from the mountaintops. And I will bring so many people to you and multiply your kingdom through this situation if you'll just let my mom be that vessel. Please save her. I'll do this. And I think that me being able to come here and speak with you today, I didn't get the results that I was asking for. Her earthly healing did not happen. But I do believe my prayers were answered in that she was healed. I do believe that. And I suppose that that's a miracle as well. And so I think that I have to shout that from the mountaintops here. And instead of me saying, he saved my mom, I can say, he gave my mom eternal life. And so I think that is a miracle, So here I am talking about this with you in the hopes of fulfilling my promise to God. In a different way, I guess. And I could never have known that I'd be sitting here 4 years ago. No. That I would have the opportunity and that our paths would cross the way that they crossed.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah, it is. And so I encourage you. I love the choice you have made in the way you view a very painful and difficult experience. I love that you can see God through all of it as not testing your faith, but literally carrying you through the difficulty of this. Difficulty such that maybe if he doesn't carry you through, maybe if you're not connected to your siblings the way you are, or you don't make the friend, or you don't do this as you are carrying your third miraculous child, then maybe you don't come out on the other side the same.
Mm-hmm.
And you choose to see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
You choose to see how God is working for good. You choose to see the fruit that continues to be produced. You're not rejoicing in your mom's passing or suffering, if she suffered. You're rejoicing in God's presence through it all.
His continued presence as well. You know, the relationship that my sister and I have today, that we're sisters, so I've always loved her. She's always loved me. Our relationship today is stronger than it's ever been. She's my go-to because I know that she's so much like my mother. She's probably going to give me the exact same advice that my mother would have. And I think she feels the same way about me in terms of me being her go-to. And not that I would have wanted my mother to pass away for our relationship to evolve into what it has. But I'm so thankful for the relationship that I have with my sister today and my brothers, but especially my sister, because it's very special.
Yeah, and I would think that just your overall faith itself, the maturity of your faith, the place that you are spiritually now versus where you were 4.5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be completely different.
It is. It's a different perspective. I think when you have somebody in heaven that you love, that your worldview changes, and you long for heaven a little bit more. Not that I want to leave my family, my children, but I certainly long for the day that I'm in heaven in eternity, with my mom and with my family. And
yeah, and I think a thing like this causes us to sort of increase our intensities to finding the truth.
mm-hmm.
I think for the spiritual life, the truth of spiritual life, right? And for me, I was put on a course where I sort of got this insatiable drive to know the truth of the spiritual life. I'm still learning that. I'll be doing that forever, hopefully, and learning more about the truths of God and the way He works in the spiritual life. But I would think that a thing like this, when your mom departs, puts you on a path, an elevated awareness of the spiritual life and the pursuit of it, and what you can do to get closer to the source of life and to know it better in a more intimate way. And I can't help but think that all suffering has to pull us in that direction, at worst. So the pursuit of the spiritual life is probably accelerated for you, and it appears to be. I mean, you came up to me and said, I believe I've seen God move in a way in my life through something that was pretty difficult, and I think I want to share that. And that doesn't happen for people.
It doesn't, does it?
I'm going to tell you, what I do right here, we have to do some searching to find people willing to share their experience with God and His presence in their lives. And people tend to minimize that and maybe not acknowledge it. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of people have had God move in their lives, and we want more people to share that. And that's the point of the podcast, is for people who have had experiences like yours to share God's presence through it all and what they've learned through it. Because I promise you, there are people that are on the other end of this that are hearing a perspective that maybe they hadn't considered before. It's going to draw them closer to God. And that's the point of it, and that's why you came. And I am so appreciative of you not coming here as much as just responding to God's calling for you to be an agent for Him.
Well, thank you for allowing me to talk about my mom.
Well, she lived a great life, and her impact on her children, and it sounds like the people that she knew continues to affect people. And, I hate that you went through that pain.
Well, thank you.
I do. It breaks my heart when people go through the pain that they have to go through when there's loss and there are hard times. But I'm so thankful that you are able to see the God in it.
Mm-hmm.
That he was like right there.
Mm-hmm.
He wept with you. He carried you. And he's growing you from it, working all of it together for good, for your good.
Yeah.
In who knows what other directions.
Mm-hmm.
So, Rebekah Welch, thanks for opening up all this stuff and for us digging into some really challenging discussions
Hard
around
questions.
the sovereignty of God and
Yes.
whether he did this stuff and what that means. And those are hard questions. And those are things that people grapple with. And I'm really glad that we were able to surface those today. So thank you for taking the time and opening up and sharing for good.
Thank you for having me.
God's role in suffering and pain is one of the most challenging and long debated topics of the spiritual life. I think he wants us to ask these questions. I think he wants us to wrestle with it. I also think he loves us without condition and wants us to do the same with him. We'll likely never fully know the way God participates in pain and suffering, but I think Rebekah has a wonderful perspective when she acknowledges and places her focus on God's presence in us as we're hurting, to work all of it together for good looking forward, rather than retrospectively considering him the originator of the pain. She'll also be the first to tell you that though it still hurts, she has enduring peace. And that should tell us something. Thank you for joining us today on A Stronger Faith. We pray daily that God speaks to you through these conversations. If you feel like God has moved you through these conversations, share them with someone else. By doing so, you may very well be exactly what they need in their time of need. Until next time, we pray for peace and a stronger faith for you and those you love.